Welcome to PMU Nursing School. I'm Nurse Tracy and I own Inked Arches Permanent Makeup in Vermont. And in this lesson of PMU Nursing School, I want to talk about the proper tattoo tray setup. And I want to talk about this because the first half dozen or so tattoo trays that I set up were done completely incorrectly. And I'm embarrassed to admit that now because I should have known better. But after working with my tattoo supervisor, because I needed to do a state-appointed 40-hour apprenticeship, I learned ways to keep my clients safe, decrease inefficiencies, and things that would make more expense over time. So let's be honest, we've all made mistakes. How many stations do you have to set up for your permanent makeup procedure? The answer should be 2. There should be 1 space for items that are not meant to be disposable. They are meant to be either sterilized or cleaned and put away for use with multiple clients. And then there's a station for items like your microblades that should be sterile and one-time use only and not reused between clients unless they are sterilized. Washing our hands before we begin setup for any procedure and working with the client is paramount. That is how we keep safe. And we also want to make sure we're using gloves and washing our hands after we wipe down with hospital-grade disinfectants. To protect client work surfaces, we need to make sure that we are using drapes, like a small stretcher sheet on the pillow of the client's head, and a dental or tattoo bib, plastic side down, on work surfaces that are then used with a barrier film to stick to your tray so that they don't move around during the procedure. If you want the complete list of setup, look at my blog. I break it down and again, decrease the inefficiencies so that you can save time and money when working with your client. So wrap everything. That includes your green soap bottle and your ring lights because you don't want to touch anything with dirty gloves that will then be used again between clients and it cannot be sterilized. And you want to make sure certain items are never on your sterile tray that you use with a client. That includes your calipers and rulers. They should only be used before the skin is opened. And if you are using a ruler that's tape, you can put it on the side of your tray and reuse it. But if you have metal calipers, you want to make sure once that you use them and open the skin, they go away, they don't touch the client again. Markers and pens should never be on your tray, and that's something that I see a lot. Even though you wipe down, they are multi-use between clients, and unless they are sterilized, things that are multi-use between clients should not go on your tray. And you can't sterilize a marker or a China marker. And scissors and tweezers, again, once the client's skin is opened, they should not be reused. And I don't put them on my tray because that's where I'm spraying my gauze with green soap. And if you have metal equipment on your tray, it can make it corrode faster. And if things are corroding, they are allowing bloodborne pathogens in, and you need to get rid of them. And again, get in the habit of keeping your PMU pen, even though it's wrapped, and your green soap bottle, even though it's wrapped, off of your tray, because anything that you cannot sterilize and use between clients should not go on your sterile tray. It's just a habit that you should be into. So let's talk about the single-use sterile tray first. I like to start by having a tissue there, either on the client's pillow or on my tray, so I remember to hand it to the client. And I like to think about my station from left to right as cleanest to dirtiest, because if I'm spraying down my gauze with green soap, I want to contain that to one area. I don't want to just have a station that's completely messy. So when I'm talking about setup, think about it like that. Then obviously now with coronavirus, we have our mask on before we begin working with the client. But after we wash our hands, we apply our gloves and touch as few things that aren't touching the client as possible. Even if it's wrapped, we don't want to be touching things that aren't the client or touching the client directly, like our microblades. Sterile packages should be opened directly on the sterile tray. That's why I call it the sterile tray. And I always remind the client and do that in front of the client and say, I'm opening this new packaging. They will always say, I trust you. But if any type of infection occurs, I want them to think back and say, oh yeah, she did say that she was opening new sterile equipment, and I want to be able to remind them of that so that there's never any doubt in their mind. Save the lot number and the packaging with the expiration date, just in case you need to track it back. Then again, talk about the tray from left to right. I will have a pile of dry gauze that is smaller than my pile of gauze that I'm going to moisten with my green soap. And that's because sometimes when I'm working with the client, I need to get traction on their skin or just dab gently without needing a little bit of the green soap on the client's skin. I don't use water wipes or baby wipes because I find they just smear the ink around, they don't really remove it. But you want to make sure to just use a very little bit of green soap because it is washing the ink out of the little cuts that you're making of microblading, not so much with microchipping. Then for pigment cups, I have at least 2, and I take a little smear of my ointment or my lidocaine or my aftercare that I'm using to secure it to my bib. And one of them is for the micellar water I use to clean the outline as I'm working with the client. And the other one is for a few drops of anesthetic. And again, you want to use as little as possible because the more you're using that goes unused ends up being waste that could have been used on another client and save you money. And Q-tips, I use one microfiber to spread anesthetic. Sometimes I use one to remove my outline, but I find a pointed Q-tip works really well to remove my outline and to also have for any patch test or to smear a thick layer of ink for my pigment soak on the client's skin. Spoolie brush is used to move the eyebrow hair out of the way, or sometimes eyelashes if you're working with an eyeliner. So I have one of those on my tray, and I will have my pigment ring. Sometimes I will make a little hole in my barrier film and just stick it there. That way, if I'm mixing my pigment, it stands up and I don't have to worry about having anything extra on my tray. Now, when you break the tray down, it's a very similar procedure every time. That way you're making sure that you're doing it the safest way every time. You want to immediately dispose of your sharps once the client is satisfied and you're ready to do after photos. And you want to make sure your sharps container is as close to you in the shop as possible, because if you're walking across your shop, you have a trip and fall hazard with a dirty sharp in your hand. You want to make sure that when you are removing your barrier film and your PPE, you are stripping down everything and putting it in a trash can. And we talked about the proper way to remove PPE after you're done working with your client safely in the previous lesson. When it's cleanup time, you want to, after you've washed your hands from working with the client, reapply gloves. Wipe down all your multi-use client tools and work surfaces with a hospital-grade disinfectant that's approved in your state or country. You want to then, after you're done cleaning, remove your gloves and rewash your hands in case there's any cuts or nicks in the glove that allow that chemical on your skin. Reset your workstation either for the next client or to clean up for the next day to go home and do a deeper clean of your entire shop. Again, because in your reputation, you want to make sure that the first thing the client sees is a very clean workspace, because if they do develop any type of infection or allergic reaction, you don't want them for a second to question that it came from a questionable shop. You want them to think at all times that they were working with a very reputable artist that was very knowledgeable and had a clean workspace. And again, check my blog if you have any questions on the easiest way to set up and break down. I'm Nurse Tracy from Inked Arches Permanent Makeup in Vermont, and this has been PMU School. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you stay tuned for the next lessons.